in the places that you folks care very much about. And it's inspiring and refreshing to see so many of you here who are committed to working in, and perhaps more importantly, committed to innovating the development sector. So thank you for being here. It's now my great, great honor to introduce to you Amelia Paris. I have known Amelia for about 6 months now, when I had the sort of, I think I would say, privilege of trying to moderate a panel at the USAID Development Conference on which that she was speaking on. And if I'm intimating that perhaps it was not my easiest moderating experience, and that's because Amelia is a force of nature. And she, despite having flown 30 hours to be here and speak with you, is raring to go backstage and to talk to you about what she's doing in her country and some of the incredible innovation that they're bringing to the development sector there. So please welcome to the stage Amelia Paris.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm sorry I'm short, but this makes it easier for me to address you here because I've got some papers. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me, and as the moderator said, I traveled 30 hours to be here because I could not resist to come and meet up with you, because I think it is very important for the young people to be so interested in trying to understand the world and how you can actually affect the changes in the world. We need that. So I thought it is worth that trip. I come from a small country of 1 million people. And my people have faced 400 years of occupation, 24 years of war. In 1999, we regained our freedom, followed by 2 years of United Nations Transition Administration. And finally, in 2002, we obtained our full independence. For a decade, we have been building our nation from scratch. Our nation had been burned to the ground, and we did generations psychologically wounded. The beginning of our journey to establish a fledgling democracy was plagued by cyclical instability and economic atrophy. By 2007, $8 billion had been spent on Timor-Leste by peacekeepers and development, but poverty had doubled. By the time my government came into office in August 2007, 1 out of 2 citizens were facing extreme poverty. We had 15% of our population, that's about 150,000 internally displaced people. We had a consumption rate negative 26%, and our economic growth was also negative 5%. Our services delivery had stopped, and the hope of our people had been reduced to almost nothing. We were labeled a failed state by some. However, I don't believe it was the state that failed, because the state had not been established by then to take such credit for such a grand failure. This is where the concept of peace building and state building comes into play. In order to keep peace, you must be able to deliver vital services. To deliver vital services, you need to have state institutions. No NGO or donor can actually take the place of a state. It is not just sustainable. In 2007, we established expansionary social and fiscal policies. We paid local welfare to the most vulnerable, the elderly, the single mothers, the veterans, the disabled. When the United Nations told us that it would take us 10 years to resettle the internal displaced people, we knew those 10 years could be a breeding ground for inequality and more instability. So we resettled them in 2 years. We started to build infrastructure, state institutions like the Anti-Corruption Commission, the Civil Service Commission, public financial management systems, and petroleum authorities, so our resource wealth would be protected and prudently managed. We sent hundreds of our students overseas to study, investing in our young generation, so that never again would we be in a position like that of my own Ministry of Finance when I first took over, where we had not one single qualified accountant, or that of the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources with no lawyer of our own. We had to move, and we had to move fast, because in most conflict environments from which 20% of global humanity lives, we have little time to consolidate stability, or instability breeds as a norm. Time is never on our side. As my Prime Minister said, when bellies are full and people see opportunity, they will keep to fight it, not destroy it. In a very short period of time, Timor-Leste went from being a failed state to being one of the fastest growing economies in the world. We still face many serious challenges, but war is not one of them, and opportunity is now seen in every village across our nation. I was not always a minister. When I was a little younger than you all, my family escaped the invasion in 1975. While half of my countrymen perished from brutal deaths, hunger, and war, I fought with the diplomatic resistance. For as long as I can remember, freedom and democracy for my nation was my life. From New York to Geneva and the halls of the United Nations, we were told Timor-Leste would never be a free nation. It might sound cliche, but we were like Rottweilers with a bone. We would not give up. And indeed, I stand here today proudly as a minister of sovereign nation, the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste. Now, I fight not just for Timor-Leste, but as the chair of the G7+, a group of 17 states, and the many more that live in fragile and conflict-affected places and situations around the world. And that is one of the reasons why I traveled 30 hours to come and be with you, because I need you to help me with this fight. In this fight, I'm also with my other colleagues, ministers of other countries, and we have the support of the international community. But back then, when we were fighting for our own independence, the global climate was much more predictable. There was just and injustice, right and wrong, but you, my young friends, face a world that is not such a simple place any longer, a world of great uncertainty. In fact, if we are to be honest, I think we can all agree that the world is in a bit of a mess. The lines are blurred between the 3 Ds, diplomacy, defense, and development, and external shocks are rapid. The concept of fragility has broadened. What we used to consider fragile, countries like mine emerging from conflict, is now a word used for so many aspects of global dynamics. We should consider ourselves in uncharted territory, and it is up to you, our future generations, to navigate a new path. So let's look at where we are, where we want to be, then look at what it will take us to get there. This is exactly how fragile and conflict-affected nations of the G7+ have outlined in the new aid architecture in the New Deal. The G7+, consisting of 17 fragile and conflict-affected countries, have come for the first time in history to have a united voice, and now we have global representation. Imagine this, 20% of our global citizens have never had a united voice or a forum from which to advocate. And when there is a gap, and where there is a gap, others fill. This gap has traditionally been filled by donors, by NGOs, by international companies. The weaker our states are or become, the stronger these parties have in taking the place of national ownership and leadership. This must stop because it has not worked in eradicating poverty, in stopping conflicts or building states in the last half century. And it will not work if we don't make radical reform and changes. Let's look at where we are now. We have a global financial crisis that sent 90 million more people into poverty. This does not look too easy. It began in the US, spread like wildfire, and went from banks to the heart of sovereignty in many nations, like Greece and Portugal. The food crisis brought a wave of citizen discontent. Austerity measures in developed countries brought acts of violence, normally only seen in the developing world. But suddenly, we are watching buildings being burned on the BBC in the UK, and of course, the Arab Spring was only a reminder of what good governance is about, serving our people. Here is a shocking statistics. The amount the US military spends annually on air conditioning in Iraq and Afghanistan is $20.2 billion. That's more than NASA's budget. It's more than BP has paid so far for damage from the Gulf oil spill. It is what the G8 has pledged to help foster new democracies in Egypt and Tunisia, not to mention almost 20 times Timor-Leste's annual budget. Big wake-up calls in the last decade, a warning, if you will, that things must change. Global isolation, look at me, it's my, what is it called, jet lag. Isolationism is no longer an option. I want to say we cannot be isolated. If we discovered one thing through this is that we as a League of Nations are interconnected and interdependent. What affects you in Boston will eventually affect me as finance minister of Timor-Leste. I tell you an example. When the price of rice went up in April in 2008, in your markets about 218%, literally overnight, this doesn't just affect my budget. It affects the very stability we work so hard to achieve, because we have to feed a nation. External shocks can be lethal in the developing world, and they usually begin in the developed world. There is no way to prepare for this if peace building and state building has not been consolidated in each and every state that wants to emerge from fragility. So where do we want to be in 2020? In 1999, when we in Timor-Leste restored our freedom after 24 years of resistance and war, I was charged with the National Development Plan, within which there was a vision we called Vision 2020. We went to every district in Timor-Leste and talked to communities and people of all ages. What I discovered is that humanity in general all have the same basic aspirations: access to health, water, food, shelter, clothing, respect, and rule of law go to the heart of feeling equal, and of course, education. But above all, people want an opportunity. In both developed and developing countries, opportunity brings peace, and in turn, peace paves the path for opportunity. And that opportunity extends to the way their states is run. People want a voice in fair and transparent systems, a state that ensures they are protected, as are the values they believe in. As chair of the G7+, I advocate for the 17 countries attempting to emerge from a history of conflict to a future of prosperity. This is not a constituency we can ignore any longer. And if we choose to do so in 20 years, we will be no further in eradicating war, poverty, criminality than we have come in the last 50 years with aid and development. These are countries rich in resources. Give them the tools to manage these resources, and they can emerge from the developing and contribute to the developed. These are the countries where generations have been lost to poverty and war to the detriment of their own opportunity and education. These are the countries that lack not only the people to serve the state, but the very institutions necessary from which to serve the people. These are the countries where the international community has become deeply entrenched, leading rather than supporting, so that we become reliant and unable to stand alone. I want to highlight a statement in the report of the United Nations Secretary General called Civilian Capacity in the Aftermath of Conflict. It was music to my ears. The very last paragraph of the summary states, above all, externally imposed solutions or skills cannot replace ownership by and capacity of national communities, their leaders, and their institutions. So, we as a global community must change the mentality, and it is our future generation that can be the agents of change, you. The biggest mistake most development actors make is that they think they understand us better than we understand ourselves, and that is simply not so. I will tell you this. You will truly never understand our languages, our political economies, our actors, our history, our hierarchical or tribal backgrounds, our embedded social structures, our beliefs, our root causes of conflict that can go back decades or even centuries, our cultural relationships, our sensitivities with each other or to power. So take this as an important life lesson. Go into the world and support those countries to stand alone, not by your standards, but through their journey of nation building. Interesting enough, last week, your Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, was in Timor-Leste. And I must say, the highlight of the week for the Timorese was having Air Force 2 on our runway. I was very impressed with her, and we appreciated very much that she found the time to visit our small country. To the outside world, the US is an interesting dichotomy. Many outsiders do not understand how you can have public education but not health, or how you can bail out banks but not people. Why you move fast at times of conflict into some countries but not others. And of course, the degree from which your private sector, especially the resource companies, have such breadth of power and outreach globally. Your biggest strength is no doubt innovation. Your biggest weaknesses, lack of global assimilation. And at times you can be criticized for that word that I was having difficulty in pronouncing, isolationism. The development restrictions, which are far too technical to address today, are a prime example. One of the former US ambassadors at large that works with us in Timor-Leste closely made a very interesting comment recently, that the US is often looked to in providing global leadership because of their promotion of democracy. I believe the role of the US should be the promotion of sovereignty and good governance. In essence, I believe that the US has three core ingredients in advancing global development. You are an advanced economy with advanced higher education and institutions, all of which provide the base for opportunity. If we look at any economy, the essential ingredients are education, human sector and capital investment, strong institutions, and a strong private sector. First, I believe the US is and always has been in a particularly strong position to promote an innovative model of private sector investment in development. I have always believed this is the way of the future. The concept of entrepreneurship is one of your country's strongest values, and that can and should be promoted through new modalities of development. I also believe the US is in a better position than most to have so many institutions of higher education and learning. The promotion of knowledge sharing and leadership training is essential in state-building nations emerging from conflict or fragility. Lastly, the US is a leader in urban planning, with your cities expanding and the concept of suburbia towns the size of my country now exist because of your ability to expand infrastructure and do so very quickly. This is critical to developing nations. Emerging from conflict, my country was completely destroyed. To this day, with over $8 billion in aid spent on our country of 1 million citizens, I cannot say it was spent in my country. We still do not have an evaluation on how much it will cost to rebuild the nation. This should and could have been done the first year of reconstruction and completed in the first 10 years of independence. So much money could have been better spent. Understand this, that after half a century, many countries in the G7+ do not have roads, schools, hospitals, or electricity. I find this astonishing when in the US you can build an entire suburb in a matter of 10 years. Share it with us. Put your innovation to practice in our nations as you have in your own. Change the paradigm, and I guarantee you will see the results. At the end of the day, this will strengthen the global footprint of the US, expand the economic possibilities of your companies and citizens, and build bridges, both literally and figuratively, in places that will be long-lasting allies to the US and its people. So, to be effective partners, like in any good relationship, you must listen first, not tell. You then must prioritize those priorities of the sovereign nation you are in. Imposing solution has been proven ineffective. We see the results, and they are not good. Country-owned and country-led plans are the only plans that are nationally owned, and therefore, we have the consensus of the people, by the people, and build trust between the people and their state. This is why, when the G7+ had the opportunity for the first time in history to influence the aid architecture specifically for them, the New Deal for engagement in fragile states, it led with 3 principles: the peace-building and state-building goals, focus, an acronym which stands for a new way of engaging in our states, and trust, another acronym which stands for joint commitments necessary for success. You must know every country is different, and going into a country with ready-made interventions is like playing darts blindfolded. And trust me, everyone comes in with their own agenda. In Timor-Leste, we have 46 donors and 302 NGOs. We have Save the Children doing agriculture. It becomes one big mess. So focus was meant to stop the fragmentation and promote country-owned and country-led plans with alignment and harmonization. One vision, one plan. How do we do this? Focus, F, for fragility assessment. We have to know where we are, where we want to go, and how to get there. We need the data to do it, and this is where we are sorely lacking. With no data, interventions are pointless. Once the assessment is done, then we have to have one vision, one plan. And then we do the C, which stands for a compact by all to stick to the plan. And the U, standing for using the peace-building and state-building goals to measure or monitor our success. And the S stands for supporting ongoing political dialogue to assess, evaluate, and make changes as needed. And when needed, flexibility is important. The G7+ has 5 global immediate priorities identified to emerge from fragility to the next stage of development. And they are inclusive politics, meaning a state for all, where everyone has a voice and political grievances can be solved peacefully. Security, our people must feel safe. Be safe to normalize and go on with their lives. Security is the cornerstone of development. Justice, legislative, economic, and social justice is vital to creating a climate for development. Revenues and resources, a critical part of state building, establishing institutions and transparent systems to manage revenue and resources, including public finance management, so our states can function independently without parallel systems of donors and NGOs. And economic foundations are critical to state building, delivering vital services to our people. So these are the priorities, and we have set in order to stop conflict, to build states, and then eradicate poverty. Trust. It's simple and easy to remember. T is for transparency. R is for risk-taking or risk-sharing. U is for country, using country systems. The only way states will be built for long-term success. S is for strengthening capacity. Our people have suffered with generations lost to war, poverty, and lack of accessibility to education. We must rebuild not only a country, but lives. And T is for timeliness of aid. As we recipients, countries must know what donors are giving, when, and if we can count on that money to fill the gaps. So remember, the peace building and state building goals, trust and focus. It's very simple. In closing, what you students are doing is called studying. What we are doing in the developing world is called capacity building, and there is no quick fix. We often expect the third world to learn in 6 months what students do over 22 years. Primary school, high school, university, master's degrees, PhDs. But suddenly, like in my country, the Timorese are asked to learn highly technical matters overnight. But in my ministry, from 723 staff, the average math proficiency is of 3rd grade. Capacity building is a long-term proposition. We can accelerate systems, procedures, protocols, and vastly improve outcomes, but if we really want sustainable results, we must train, send them early, at post-conflict stage, so at the reform stage in development, we have qualified people to build the nation. As I said earlier, in August 2007, when I started my first day as a minister, I did not have one qualified Timorese accountant, not one. The place was filled with World Bank, UN, IMF, and what seemed like every other organization putting in their 2 cents worth. But my very first audit showed 54% of the entire budget in 2006 and 2007 was made to a vendor called No Vendor. And after years of independence, no accountant. So what can you do? Make sure this never happens again. Share your knowledge side by side with your counterparts around the world. Be creative and innovative in doing so. You can be the next generation to change the mentality of the donor world from do it our way to how can we learn to do it in the best way with you by your side. You can use your advocacy work to promote the New Deal, to make it a real deal. Understand that in the case of Timor-Leste, my people have survived 8 centuries. In modern history, we survived 400 years of occupation, 24 years of war of freedom, for freedom, 2 years of a United Nations Transitional Authority, and 5 years after independence. But it was not until we took national ownership of our own development agenda that success was tangible. In 2007, when we did take ownership, we reduced poverty by 9%. We consolidated peace, we accelerated economic development, and reached average double-digit growth rates year on year. My people today see hope, but they see it through their own eyes, the eyes of their people and their leaders that serve them. I challenge each and every one of you here today to change the mentality, change the paradigm, change your leadership share your leadership skills, your knowledge, and above all, be a pioneer as an agent of change. Do it through the eyes of those in the developing world, not through the lens of the developed. Thank you.
Let me raise the microphone a little. Isn't she 59 inches of amazing? Amelia's extraordinary. We were backstage speaking, and I was telling her about some of my recent work in conflict zones, and she said to me, "Do you know what the problem with the media is?" And I said, I don't. You should tell me. And she said, "I will," and she did. She told me that we always cover the bad news. We always cover the bad news. And I said, "Amelia, I'm a war correspondent. I go to conflict zones. Like, death and dying, tragedy and destruction. This is very important but solemn news that people need to know. And she said, no, you need to tell the good stories. She said, I live in a war zone, or she has lived in a war zone. And in every war zone, there are amazing stories of families doing incredible things for each other. So to me, just that little anecdote from 10 minutes ago tells me two things about Amelia. One, that she's right, that we do need to cover the good stories, even in very difficult times. And two, that she has an ability to speak truth to power, a veracity and a tenacity about her, where she's willing to tell a lowly CNN war zone correspondent like myself that he's wrong, but she applies that same standard and principle to some of the most powerful leaders on earth. And with that ability, I think she's been able to move mountains. So we're very privileged to have her here, and I very much look forward to seeing her in a few minutes on the same panel with Dr. Sachs. A couple pieces of housekeeping before we move on. The first is that we found a credit card. So if you lost your credit card, please come to the back and claim it. And if not, on behalf of the MCC 2012 bar tab, we thank you. The second piece of housekeeping is in that a few moments I'm going to be moderating a closing panel with some of the incredible people that we have backstage. And during this panel, despite my sort of knuckle-dragging, luditic tendencies, we're going to try and take a few questions via Twitter from the audience. So feel free to tweet, and I will feel free to not retrieve them and make your question up. But we'll give it a shot, and we'll see if it works. So now it's my great privilege to introduce our next speaker. I had about 4 months ago, I was coming from West Africa to speak at a panel in Washington, D.C. at a USAID panel. And little did I know as I was flying over the Atlantic Ocean that Hurricane Sam was making landfall at the same time. Now, Hurricane Sam is, of course, Sam Vagar, who is the organizer of this conference. And when I met Sam at this conference, he invited me to come speak and to help moderate this panel that's upcoming. And I said that I would. He sort of tracked me down after I got off stage. And I said, yeah, if my schedule permits. Little did I know that he would continue to hunt me across 4 continents over the next 4 months until he guaranteed that I was here in Boston. So I think it's that kind of drive and that kind of mission that produced the event that we have today. So without further ado, please welcome the reason that we're all here,